Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Waj. Hope you guys are all doing well. And here we're going to compare the 2016 version of the MacBook Pro versus probably one of the most popular laptops out there right now, the 2015 version of the MacBook Air. So we're going to be basically taking a look at the key differences between these two in terms of design, performance, and battery life. So without any further ado, let's get right into it. Now, before we begin, we do have to mention that there's a pretty big difference between the two in terms of the design and, of course, the price spectrum. The MacBook Air, this current design that you're looking at right now, even though it's the latest 2015 version that's available right now, was actually first introduced in back 2010, and that makes it almost 7 years old. So this design definitely needs to be refreshed, and I'm sure we'll see one very, very soon. Versus the new version of the MacBook Pro has pretty much all the latest and greatest technology in terms of the very thin profile. In fact, it's much thinner than even the Air, measuring only about 1.49 centimeters versus the Air at its thickest point is around 1.7 centimeters. And in terms of weight itself, both are relatively light. The Air is just a little bit lighter at around 1.35 kilograms versus about 1.37 kilograms on the Pro. Now, even though both computers have a 13.3-inch display, the Pro is actually smaller both when it comes to the width and depth, dimensionally speaking, so it has a smaller overall footprint than the current generation MacBook Air as well. Now, in terms of ports and connectivity, as you may or may not know, the new Pro has pretty much nothing but Thunderbolt 3/USB Type-C integration. It has 4 of those ports. Now, on the plus side, basically these ports are cross-compatible with a whole bunch of different things. It has Thunderbolt 3 compatibility, so that means data transferring up to 40 gigabits per second, USB 3.0 connectivity as well, up to 10 gigabits per second in terms of data transferring speed. It also serves as a display interface for 5K displays at up to 60 hertz refresh rate, as well as each of these ports can be used for charging the actual laptop itself. Of course, the big caveat is if you don't have a lot of USB Type-C devices, you're going to have to deal with a lot of adapters, which is definitely a pain. Versus on the Air, you have many more of the day-to-day conventional ports that you would use, such as a normal USB Type-A connector, as well as a full-size SD card slot. Now, in person, if you're comparing these two, one of the things you'll notice straight off the bat is the new display on the Pro is absolutely sensational. It's a Retina display, so 2560 by 1600, versus the Air is still using a 1440 by 900 native resolution. It's a TN panel, so unlike the IPS panel that we have on the Pro, if you look at the display at oblique angles or extreme vantage points, you can see a notable dip in terms of brightness and a significant shift when it comes to colors. Of course, looking at the display on the new MacBook Pro, it's absolutely sensational in terms of sharpness. It has a wider color gamut than even sRGB, so even better than the previous generation MacBook Pro with the Retina display, and has a very bright screen of over 500 nits. All in all, what it means that your day-to-day computing experience will look a lot more premium. Everything in terms of photos and web pages will look extremely sharp, that Retina quality that you expect to see on a high-density display. Versus on the Air, definitely needs to be upgraded to an IPS higher resolution display to kind of take advantage of current day technology. Now, moving on, there is a pretty big price difference between these two computers. Basically, our 13-inch Air, this is the baseline configuration, retails for about just under $1,000, versus we do have the 13.3-inch space gray MacBook Pro with the touch bar integrated in there, which basically is retailing for around $17.99, depending upon where you are in the world. But in terms of US standards, with this computer, you do get a fairly fast Core i5 dual-core chip. It's a 6000 series processor, and it's clocked around 2.9 gigahertz, and it can turbo up to 3.3 gigahertz. Versus on the Air, we're using the 5th generation Intel Core i5 dual-core chip that's clocked around 1.6 gigahertz, but it can turbo up to 2.7 gigahertz. Furthermore, in terms of graphics, we're using Intel Iris 550 graphics on the new Pro, and we're using Intel HD 36000 series graphics on the Air. Now, let's actually talk about the real-world performance differences between the two, and what we're going to go through is some of the benchmarks that I tested both computers out with. The first thing is GEEKBENCH 3. As you can see, based on the multi-core and single-core performance benchmark, you can see that there's a big difference between the two. We're getting over 7,500 points on the Pro and 3,600 points on the single-core side versus on the Air. The single-core side and the multi-core side is significantly lower by almost 35%. Moving on and taking a look at another CPU-specific benchmark using CINEBENCH R15, we get a score about 338 on the 2016 Pro versus about 257 on the Air. NovaBench is kind of an all-encompassing OS 10 benchmark, and we get a score about 767 on the Pro versus 627 on the Air. Additionally, when it comes to the Heaven graphical speed test at 720p high details, we get a huge difference between the two in terms of graphical capabilities, about 39 average FPS versus 20.9 average FPS on the Air. Additionally, when it comes to the Blackmagic speed tests, specifically when it comes to the SSD performance, both have integrated PCI Express SSD, but we have a much higher throughput on the 2016 Pro of over 2 gigabytes a second in terms of read speeds, and the write speed is at 1.3 gigabytes versus the Air is getting about 1.4 gigabytes a second in terms of read and about 680 megabytes a second in terms of write. So pretty significant difference between the two, as you would expect, considering the price range on the new computer. Now, all this means that basically on the Air, it's still kind of geared towards a more simpler user that is just going to do a little bit of web browsing, media consumption, and wants an excellent computer for battery life, versus the Pro is still going to cater to somebody that needs to do some video editing, photo editing, and needs a little bit more horsepower out of their PC. Now, the last thing that we're going to talk about is the battery performance between the two. In terms of actual specifications, both have the same capacity, about 54 watt-hour lithium polymer battery, and Apple does claim that you get around 10 hours of web browsing time using the new 2016 Pro, and you get about 12 hours comparable on the current generation MacBook Air. Now, I couldn't do exact scientific analysis on terms of web browsing battery life performance, but I could do a video playback test. So basically, I ran a continuous loop of the same video playing on both machines, had the brightness around 50% on both PCs, Wi-Fi off, Bluetooth off, and basically measured out the time that it took from the battery to go to 100% to near 0%. And here are the results over here. On the playback time is around 11 hours 14 minutes on the Air versus the Pro got around 7 hours 41 minutes. So a pretty big difference between the two. A solid 3 to 4 hours difference depending upon your situation. And of course, this is probably going to translate into your battery life performance for general everyday to-day use. So certainly the Air is still the king when it comes to battery performance in the Apple world. And if you want a computer for endurance specifically, it's still very competitive in terms of that regard. But in terms of every other performance measure, the new Pro is pretty much superior in every way, as we mentioned before. Now, if you are interested in seeing how the new 2016 MacBook Pro compares against the 2015 model, we actually have a dedicated comparison for that. You'll find a link in the description, or you can click on the card to go to that video. But other than that, guys, that's really it. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you later. Take care.